Hi everyone, it's Erin Peliquin from Digital Photography for Moms. In this video, I am going to show you how I edited these two photos that both have the moon in them. I'm going to start with this one, which I was so hopeful for when I took the photo. Like every image we take with the moon in it, the moon just appears a whole lot smaller than it did in real life. When I took this photo, oh my gosh, y'all, the moon was amazing. It was huge, it was warm and yellow, and I feel like it took up maybe about that much space in the horizon. It was perfectly centered over kind of the line of symmetry in this photo, and I really wanted to capture that in a photo. So there are a couple of issues that are going on with this image. So first off, of course, is that the moon is too small, but second off is the exposure issue that we run into so many times in photos. You can see that the foreground is much too dark here. So I'm going to take this to the develop mode and show you a couple of options for dealing with it. So the shortcut for the develop mode, by the way, is the letter D. So the first thing I could try is cropping away some of the foreground. That might make the moon look slightly larger in proportion to the rest of the photo. But I don't like that as much. So I really kind of like that large foreground that I have, and this puts more detail on this kind of busy stuff back here, the chairs and the fire hydrant. So I'm going to type the letter R to go back to the crop tool, and I'll hit reset. So I'll type letter R one last time to turn off the crop tool. And now I'm just going to try this shadow slider to brighten up my foreground. And you can see that that works really nicely. I just want some detail on the greens and the palm trees and the path right here that leads our eye right up here to the moon. Now at this point I could remove the fire extinguisher in Lightroom, but I'm going to take this image into Photoshop anyway, so I think it would be easier for me to remove there. Now if I want to enhance the sky, I can do that by using this hue, saturation, and luminance panel. I can make the sky darker by clicking on luminance, grabbing the local adjustment tool, and then clicking and dragging down. And then I can increase the saturation of the blue by clicking and dragging up. So that's approaching kind of a midnight blue. And I really like that effect for this photo. Now I'm noticing that I've got some vignetting up here in the corners and probably down here as well, though it's not quite as noticeable. So I am going to scroll down to my lens correction panel and enable the profile correction. And you can see that right away that lightened up the corners significantly. In fact, so much that I think I will reduce my shadows adjustment here. I don't want that much light in the foreground because it's distracting my eye from moving up to the sun. So right now I'm happy with that. Okay, now before we take this photo into Photoshop, I want to look at this next one. So this photo, the moon does look slightly bigger, but we've got a serious silhouette going on in the trees. So I could go really extreme here and increase the exposure and increase the shadows. And it's that shadows brightening that really brings out the color of the tree. However, it was getting dark when I took this photo, so I don't want to go this aggressively in brightening the foreground. So I'm going to bring my exposure back a lot closer to 0, maybe right about, maybe a little bit over 1. I can brighten my shadows a little bit more. And now I'm going to play with the luminance and saturation of the sky, just like I did in the other photo. So I don't want to get too far because you'll see that that brings out the noise in the sky and you start getting kind of a banding effect. That banding would probably be pretty obvious here as I increase the saturation. So you can see that the different shades of blue don't mix well when you're really adjusting the colors. So I'm going to bring saturation down, going to bring luminance back up, maybe something like that, and then I'm going to adjust my saturation just a little bit more. All right, so this is good. In fact, because I've brightened the sky, I might reduce exposure just a little bit more, maybe to right about there. Okay. Okay, so both of these photos are ready to go into Photoshop now. So I'm going to select them both, right click and select Edit in Adobe Photoshop. All right, so I am going to zoom in a little bit on this photo. One thing I don't like about it is that the moon is not very well focused in this image, but I'm going to use this one to show you the simplest technique for enlarging a moon. Before I do that, I am going to zap away the fire hydrant. So I zoomed in using Command or Control and the plus sign, and then I am going to grab the patch tool and just draw right around the fire. Oops. I didn't pick up the shadow there, so I used Command or Control Z to undo what I had drawn. And then I'm going to click and drag over part of the photo that will fix it. And that's good enough for me. So zooming out, I'm happy with that. Now, holding down the space bar, I'm going to bring the moon closer to the center of my workspace and hit Command or Control and the plus sign again to zoom in just a touch more. All right, so selecting my oval or elliptical marquee tool, I am going to click and drag around the moon, and notice that I'm getting a good bit outside the moon too. The reason for that is that I want to capture some of that bright halo that surrounds the moon. So now I'm typing Command or Control C to copy, and then Command or Control V to paste. Now we don't see any difference at this point because all I've done is copy something that's already there. However, I am going to take this into Free Transform, this layer, by typing Command or Control T. Now, to constrain proportions, in other words, to avoid distorting the shape of the moon while we make it larger, in full Photoshop, we're going to hold down the Shift key while we click and drag. However, in Photoshop Elements, there's going to be a button down here on your toolbar that you can click that says Constrain Proportions. So because I'm in full Photoshop here, I've got my Shift key held down and I'm going to click and drag. And you can see that the moon is getting bigger. Now I don't want to go too far. I'm going to stop right about there. I'm going to hit the check mark to commit. And then I am going to hold down Command or Control and hit the minus sign while I zoom out a bit. Going to select my move tool and then bring the moon, kind of center it back over where it was. And so at this point, what I see is that we don't have a very good transition here. So because we're using full Photoshop, we can use the blend if mode. So this is great. We're going to go to Layer, Layer Style, Blending Options. And I am going to change this blend if blue. And so I'm just going to move this top layer over until I see some of that effect disappear. So what it's doing is allowing the blue colors to show through. Now, if you've got Photoshop Elements, you don't have this blend if, but you do have the clone stamp tool, and you can just use the clone stamp to clean up the area around the moon and make it blend in more naturally. So I'm going to hit OK there. I'm going to zoom all the way out by typing Command or Control and hitting the 0 key. And let's show you a before and an after. It's better, but this is not a great moon, again, because it was not focused well. So let's go to this other photo. And you can see that we actually can see the texture on the moon. Granted, it's not as big as the other one, but it's not, it's better focused and I like it better. So I'm going to follow the same technique here. So dragging out that marquee. In fact, what you can do is maybe add a feathering of 10 to 20 pixels, depending on how large your image is, and that will make those edges a little bit softer. So I've got that selected, Command or Control C to copy, Command or Control V to paste, and then finally Command or Control T to go into Free Transform. So holding down that Shift key, I'm stretching and dragging out the moon. And now I'm going to hit the check mark to commit. Let me zoom out a bit, and it's a whole lot bigger. And this really is what my eyes saw that night. Now, when you're clicking and dragging to make the moon look bigger, you want to be careful that you don't stretch it out too far. Number one, it won't look natural, but number two, this little area that we've copied is not very big. And the more you stretch it out, the more likely it is to get pixelated, which will be obvious. So you don't want to do that. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is actually copy this layer into my first file. You can do this whether you're in Photoshop or Photoshop Elements. Going to turn off that first copy I made, going to select my move tool and click and drag, and I've got that image lined up perfectly. One more time, I'm going to go to layer style, blending options. And move that blue slider over just a touch so that we get a realistic look. All right, so this is really what I saw that night. The last thing that I want to do is just warm this up, make it slightly more golden. So I am going to add a solid color adjustment layer, and I'm just going to click kind of in the gold for right now, not the purple, the gold. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to reduce the opacity very low. And then I am going to go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask. And this constrains the yellow to just what is here in the moon layer. So now that I've got that, I can kind of play with the tone of the yellow until it matches what I had in my mind. So maybe something about like that. I can increase the opacity. Ooh, not there. So something like that I'm happy with. So let's turn that off and on. You can see that that very subtly warms the moon up. And then let's do a before and an after on this image. Much better. Okay, so just to sum up, you want to brighten any foreground areas that you need to brighten using Lightroom, especially if you've shot in RAW. You can, of course, do it in Photoshop or Photoshop Elements, but it will be easier in Lightroom. It will also be quicker. And then in Photoshop, you're just going to find a good moon, copy it, place it into the file, and stretch it out if you need to. You can even copy the existing moon, as we saw in this photo, and just make it darker. So here's a before on that one, and there's an after. All right, y'all, thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions at all, link back to the blog post on my website for this topic and leave a comment. Have a great day.